We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. The metallic clang of surgical instruments echoed through Operating Room 3 at Metropolitan General Hospital. Dr. Abraham Wilkins stood over his patient, his gloved hands steady as they had been for the past 23 years of performing cardiothoracic surgeries. BP's dropping, Dr. Wilkins, the anesthesiologist announced. Abraham's eyes remained fixed on the exposed heart before him. Increase the dopamine drip. Let's get that pressure up. His movements were precise, calculated, a stark contrast to the chaos churning inside his mind. Dr. Lourdes Mansfield, assisting on the other side of the table, noticed the slight tension in his shoulders. She had worked alongside Abraham long enough to read the subtle signs others might miss. 3 hours later, as they scrubbed out, Lourdes broke the silence. That was close in there. We got it done, Abraham replied, methodically washing his hands. Your hands were steady as always, Abe, but your mind was somewhere else. Lourdes dried her hands, studying his reflection in the steel sink. Coffee. In the doctor's lounge, Abraham stared into his cup of black coffee, the events from last night's parent-teacher conference replaying in his mind. 24 hours earlier, the hallways of Westbrook Academy buzzed with activity as parents moved from classroom to classroom. Abraham adjusted his tie, having come straight from the hospital. Rebecca should have been there, but another yoga class had taken priority. Pete Wiggins's classroom smelled of chalk dust and teenage anxiety. The AP chemistry teacher's desk was cluttered with graded papers and half-empty coffee cups. Posters of the periodic table and molecular structures decorated the walls. Dr. Wilkins. Pete's handshake was firm, his smile too familiar. Caitlin's one of our brightest students. She definitely inherited those brains from somewhere. Thank you. Rebecca and I are proud of her dedication. Pete's expression shifted slightly at Rebecca's name. Ah yes, Mrs. Wilkins mentioned during book club that she's been helping Caitlin with her chemistry studies. Abraham's physician's intuition, honed by decades of reading subtle symptoms, picked up on something in Pete's tone. Book club? Oh yes. Pete shuffled some papers on his desk. The one that meets during my free periods on Thursdays. Your wife's quite the literature enthusiast. Rebecca had told him she attended yoga classes on Thursdays. Back in the present, Lourdes' voice cut through his thoughts. Earth to Abraham. Sorry. He set down his coffee. Just thinking about something Pete Wiggins said at parent-teacher conferences. The chemistry teacher Caitlin's always talking about? The same. Abraham leaned back, his surgical scrubs crinkling. Did you know Rebecca's apparently in a book club that meets during his free periods? I thought she did yoga on Thursdays. So did I. The silence between them spoke volumes. Clark Sheridan's office was exactly what you'd expect from a former FBI agent turned private investigator. Functional, organized, and completely unremarkable. The man himself matched his surroundings. Mid-50s, gray at the temples, wearing a suit that was practical rather than fashionable. Tell me everything, Clark said, his notebook open and pen poised. Abraham recounted the inconsistencies he'd noticed. Rebecca's changing schedules, the book club that conflicted with supposed yoga classes, Pete Wiggins's oddly intimate knowledge of his wife's activities. Clark made notes in precise, economical strokes. How long has your daughter been at Westbrook? Since freshman year. 3 years now. And when did the yoga classes start? Abraham frowned. Around the same time. Clark nodded, his expression neutral. I'll need a few days to establish surveillance and basic background checks. In the meantime, maintain your normal routine. Don't give any indication that you suspect anything. A week later, Clark's preliminary report lay on Abraham's desk at the hospital. Rebecca's yoga studio had no record of her membership. The book club she claimed to attend didn't exist, at least not officially. Dr. Wilkins? His office door opened, revealing Janet, one of the nurses. Your 3 o'clock valve replacement was canceled. The patient's blood work wasn't optimal. Abraham nodded, quickly sliding the report into his drawer. Thank you, Janet. Could you ask Dr. Mansfield to stop by when she has a moment? Later that afternoon, Lourdes perched on the edge of his office chair, reading Clark's findings. Jesus, Abe. There's more. He handed her a business card. Wendy Bartlett. The school librarian reached out to Clark yesterday. What did she say? She's been keeping records. Security footage, sign-in sheets, patterns of behavior. Apparently, Pete has a history of close relationships with students' mothers. Lourdes set down the report. Have you talked to Rebecca? Not yet. Clark's gathering more evidence. He says I need to be strategic about this. What about Caitlin? Abraham's face tightened. That's complicated. There are some medical markers in her blood work that never quite made sense. I've always dismissed it, but now, you think. I don't know what to think anymore. The next week passed in a blur of surgeries, surveillance updates, and sleepless nights. Clark's investigation produced a steady stream of evidence. Credit card statements showing purchases at times and places that contradicted Rebecca's stories, security footage from Westbrook Academy showing her car in the parking lot during Pete's free periods, and finally, the damning testimony from Wendy Bartlett. The school librarian sat across from Abraham in Clark's office, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I should have said something sooner, but without proof. Tell him what you saw last Thursday, Clark prompted. Wendy pulled out her phone, fingers trembling slightly as she pulled up a video. I stay late most days, cataloging new acquisitions. My office overlooks the science wing. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Rebecca, entering Pete's classroom after hours. The lights dimming. No one emerging for over an hour. There's more, Clark said quietly. Going back 3 years. Abraham's world tilted on its axis. 3 years. Since Caitlin started at Westbrook. The DNA test results arrived on a Tuesday. Abraham stared at the numbers and percentages that demolished 18 years of fatherhood. His office at Metropolitan General had never felt more sterile, more cold. The drive home that evening was a blur. He barely registered the familiar streets of their upscale neighborhood, the manicured lawns of Oakwood, or the Tudor-style home he had purchased when Caitlin was born. All he could see were the numbers on that report. Rebecca's car was in the driveway. Caitlin's debate practice wouldn't end for another hour, or so he thought. He found Rebecca in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner with practiced precision. She looked up, smiling. You're home early. Rough day? You could say that. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. We need to talk, Rebecca. She set down the knife. What's wrong? Where were you last Thursday afternoon? Yoga class, you know that? Really? Because I have security footage of you entering Pete Wiggins's classroom at 3:45 p.m. The color drained from Rebecca's face. Abe. 3 years, Rebecca. 3 years of lies. It's not what you think. Don't. His hand slammed down on the counter, making the knife rattle. Don't you dare try to explain this away. I have everything. The false yoga classes, the non-existent book club, the money you've been funneling to him. You had me investigated? Her shock turned to anger. How dare you? How dare I? How dare you? 18 years of marriage, Rebecca. 18 years, and Caitlin isn't even mine. The sound of a backpack hitting the floor made them both turn. Caitlin stood in the doorway, her debate team uniform still pristine, her face a mask of horror. Practice ended early, she whispered. Caitlin, honey, Rebecca started. Get out, Abraham said quietly. What? Both Rebecca and Caitlin spoke simultaneously. Get out of my house, Rebecca. Now. Caitlin stepped between them. You can't kick her out. This is her home too. Caitlin, please. Rebecca reached for her daughter. No. Caitlin's voice rose. How dare you kick Mom out of the house, just over a tiny affair? Abraham's laugh was hollow. A tiny affair? With your teacher? The man who, as it turns out, is your biological father. The silence that followed was deafening. You're lying, Caitlin whispered. Abraham walked to his office, retrieved the DNA test results, and returned. He handed them to Caitlin with surgical precision. I'm a doctor, Caitlin. These numbers don't lie. Tears streamed down Caitlin's face as she read. This can't be true. Ask your mother. Rebecca's silence was answer enough. If you won't let her back in the house, Caitlin crumpled the papers. You're no longer my dad. I never was. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. Go pack your things, both of you. I want you out tonight. Abe, please, Rebecca tried one last time. We can talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. You can contact my lawyer tomorrow. He turned away, his voice clinical, detached. You know what? Go and live with your mom on the streets. Get out from here. The sound of their footsteps on the stairs, of drawers being yanked open and clothes being stuffed into bags, of muffled sobs and angry whispers, filled the house. Abraham stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the half-chopped vegetables and shattered remnants of his life. Later that night, after they had gone, Abraham sat in his dark office at home. The house echoed with emptiness. On his desk, family photos seemed to mock him, vacation snapshots, graduation ceremonies, holiday portraits, 18 years of memories, all built on lies. His phone buzzed. A text from Lourdes. Do you need company? He stared at the message for a long moment before responding. Not tonight. Surgery at 7 a.m. tomorrow. Setting the phone down, Abraham looked at the DNA test results one last time before filing them away. Tomorrow, he would call Barry Hahn and start the divorce proceedings. Tomorrow, he would begin dismantling the life he thought he had. But tonight, in the darkness of his office, Dr. Abraham Wilkins allowed himself to feel the full weight of betrayal. The steady hands that had saved countless lives trembled as he poured himself a drink, and for the first time in decades, he wept. Barry Hahn's corner office overlooked the city courthouse, a view he'd earned through 20 years of prosecuting the worst kinds of betrayal. The former prosecutor studied the DNA test results and surveillance photos spread across his mahogany desk. They're not wasting any time, Barry said, sliding a legal notice across to Abraham. Marcy King filed the divorce petition this morning. She's demanding immediate spousal support and exclusive use of the house. Abraham's fingers tightened on his coffee cup. The house I bought before we were married? Marcy's aggressive, but she's not subtle. Barry leaned back, his chair creaking. She's built her career bleeding men like you dry. Successful professionals who can't afford public scandal. I won't be blackmailed. Good. Barry pulled out a thick folder. Because our forensic accountant found something interesting in your joint accounts, the numbers told a story more sordid than even Abraham had imagined. Regular transfers to an offshore account, carefully disguised as charitable donations. Credit card statements showing expensive gifts. Hotel charges in neighboring cities. How much? Abraham asked. Close to $500,000 over the past 3 years. Barry highlighted several transactions. Most of it coincides with Pete Wiggins's known gambling debts. A knock interrupted them. Barry's secretary entered with another stack of documents. The subpoenas for Westbrook Academy's records just came through. Perfect. Barry turned to Abraham. Ready to go on offense? What's our strategy? We hit them with everything. Financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, alienation of affection. And once we expose Pete's gambling debts, Rebecca's lawyer will have to shift from offense to damage control. Abraham stared out at the courthouse. And Caitlin? Barry's expression softened slightly. She's 17, almost legally an adult. The courts will consider her preference, but given the circumstances, I don't want her money. Or her time. Abraham stood. I just want the truth on record. Across town, in Marcy King's significantly more modern office, Rebecca sat with perfect posture, her designer handbag clutched like a shield. He's not playing fair, Rebecca insisted. Using private investigators, DNA tests, it's harassment. Marcy, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, typed rapidly on her laptop. It's legal discovery, and he's within his rights. What concerns me are these financial transfers. I was helping a friend in need. A friend who happened to be having an affair with you? Marcy's fingers stopped moving. A friend who's the biological father of your daughter? Rebecca's composure cracked slightly. You don't understand. No, you don't understand. Marcy closed her laptop. Your husband's lawyer was a prosecutor. He's building a criminal case, not just a divorce filing. Those transfers weren't just betrayal. They were fraud. But the prenup. The prenup becomes void if criminal activity is proven. Marcy's voice hardened. Tell me everything about Pete's gambling. Now. Headmaster Wilson Daly's office at Westbrook Academy radiated old-world privilege. Oak paneling, leather chairs, and generations of alumni photographs created an atmosphere of unshakable tradition. But today, that tradition was trembling. "This can't go public," Wilson insisted, his bow tie slightly askew. The reputation of the school?" Wendy Bartlett's voice shook with anger. "What about the reputation of every student whose mother Pete Wiggins targeted?" "Now, Ms. Bartlett, I have documentation going back 3 years." Wendy placed a USB drive on his desk. Security footage, email correspondence, complaints from other staff members that were lost in the system. Wilson's face reddened. "Those files are school property, and I've already shared copies with Jamie Goldstein at the Herald." The name of the investigative reporter made Wilson collapse back into his chair. "You didn't. She's running the story next week." Wendy stood. Unless? Unless you do the right thing. Fire Pete. Launch a formal investigation. Make this right." Before Wilson could respond, his phone buzzed. His secretary's voice trembled. "Sir, there are police officers here with a warrant. And a news crew in the parking lot." Jamie Goldstein stood in front of the school's iconic brick facade, her red hair bright against the gathering storm clouds. Her cameraman adjusted the frame as she reviewed her notes. Westbrook Academy, the prestigious private school that has educated the city's elite for over a century, faces allegations of misconduct and cover-ups. Multiple sources within the school have provided evidence of inappropriate relationships between a teacher and students' mothers, along with financial irregularities involving hundreds of thousands of dollars. Parents gathered at the edges of the shot, phones recording, whispers spreading like wildfire. A police car pulled up, and 2 detectives emerged with boxes of seized documents. Inside, Pete Wiggins sat in the chemistry lab for the last time, watching through the window as his career imploded. His phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "They know about the money. All of it." His hands shook as he opened his desk drawer, pulling out a letter of resignation he'd prepared weeks ago. Too late now. The police would find the gambling debts, the loans, the threats from bookies. And Rebecca would tell them everything to save herself. The lab door opened. Detective Sarah Chin entered, her badge glinting. "Mr. Wiggins? We need to talk about some financial transactions." In the library, Wendy Bartlett watched the scene unfold while copying more files. Other teachers began coming forward, the school counselor with notes from concerned students, the janitor with after-hours access logs, the business office staff with questioned expense reports. "Ms. Bartlett?" A junior reporter from the Herald approached. "Can you tell us how long you've been documenting these incidents?" "Since the first red flag." Wendy looked at the growing crowd outside. "Sometimes doing the right thing means burning everything down and starting over." The modest 2-bedroom apartment felt like a prison to Rebecca. No housekeeper, no garden service, no country club membership. Just beige walls and IKEA furniture. "We can't live like this," she told Caitlin, who sat curled on the second-hand couch. "Your father is destroying us." "He's not my father." Caitlin's voice was bitter. "You made sure of that. Don't take that tone with me." Rebecca paced the small living room. "Everything I did was for us. And now he's trying to ruin everything. My reputation, my future, your future. What about Pete?" Caitlin's question hung in the air. "Pete's." Rebecca's voice trailed off. "Pete's dealing with his own problems." "You mean his gambling debts? The ones you paid with Dad's, with Abraham's money?" Rebecca spun to face her daughter. "How did you?" "It's all over school." Caitlin stood, her face flushed. "Everyone knows. Do you have any idea what it's like there now? My teacher, my biological father, was sleeping with students' mothers and stealing their money." "It wasn't stealing. It was." "Stop lying." Caitlin grabbed her phone. "At least Abraham told me the truth, even when it hurt." Rebecca's expression hardened. "Truth? You want truth? Fine. He's trying to destroy us, so we'll destroy him first." She pulled out a notebook. "I've kept records of every patient he's lost, every complication in surgery. By the time I'm done, no one will trust him with a paper cut, let alone heart surgery. You're talking about ruining his career." Caitlin's voice shook. "People could die if they're afraid to let him operate. He should have thought of that before he threw us out." "Before he discovered your lies, you mean?" Rebecca ignored her daughter's comment, already typing on her laptop. I've contacted every medical board in the state. Anonymous complaints about drinking before surgery, prescribing unnecessary medications, inappropriate behavior with nurses. None of that is true. It doesn't have to be true. Rebecca's smile was cold. It just has to be loud enough, constant enough, to create doubt. Unless what? Unless he agrees to reinstate us in his will. Give us what we deserve. At Metropolitan General, Abraham sat in Chief of Surgery Troy Calderon's office, surrounded by his colleagues. Dr. Lourdes Mansfield read through the latest batch of complaints. This is ridiculous, Lourdes said. Everyone knows you're the most careful surgeon on staff. You won't even take aspirin during call weeks. Troy Calderon, a commanding presence even seated, nodded. Our lawyers are already preparing responses. Every case Rebecca cited has complete documentation showing standard of care was not just met but exceeded, but the damage is already spreading. Abraham gestured to his significantly lighter surgery schedule. Patients are requesting other surgeons, not your regular patients. Lourdes set down the complaints, not the ones who know you. And the staff is behind you completely. Every nurse, every tech, every resident. They're all willing to sign statements supporting you. Salvatore Bernard, the hospital's lead counsel, entered with a stack of papers. We've got enough for a defamation suit. Multiple counts, provable damages, clear malicious intent. Do it, Abraham said quietly. No settlements, no deals. It'll be public, Troy warned. Messy. Everything's already public. Abraham stood. I've lost my wife, my daughter, and my home. I won't lose my integrity too. Later that night, Abraham sat in his office, reviewing surgical notes for the few cases that remained on his schedule. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It's Caitlin. Mom's lost it. She's going to destroy everything you've built unless you give her what she wants. I'm sorry. For everything. Abraham stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. Through his window, he could see the lights of the hospital chapel where he'd prayed the day Caitlin was born. The day he'd promised to always protect her, always love her. Some promises, he realized, were broken long before they were made. The next morning, Rebecca received a letter from Abraham's lawyers, not offering surrender or compromise, but serving notice of a defamation suit backed by the full power of Metropolitan General Hospital. As she read the detailed documentation dismantling each of her false complaints, her phone buzzed with news that would shatter what remained of her plans. Pete Wiggins had taken a deal with prosecutors. He would testify about everything, the affair, the money, the other mothers, in exchange for leniency. In his hospital office, Abraham prepared for his first surgery of the day, his hands steady as ever. Outside, life went on. Patients needed him, residents needed teaching, and the truth, slowly but surely, was emerging from the wreckage of lies. Dr. Lourdes Mansfield watched him scrub in, noting the straight line of his shoulders, the calm focus in his eyes. Ready? Always. Abraham stepped into the OR, leaving the chaos of his personal life outside those sterile doors. Here, in this room, there was only the work, the healing, the truth of what his hands could do. And for now, that was enough. The courthouse's oak-paneled courtroom sat silent as Judge Eleanor Martinez reviewed the final pieces of evidence. Barry Hahn stood confidently at the plaintiff's table, while Rebecca shifted uncomfortably beside Marcy King, her designer outfit now months out of style. Your Honor, Barry's voice carried easily through the chamber, we'd like to present evidence of additional financial fraud perpetrated by Mrs. Wilkins and Mr. Wiggins. The projector hummed to life, displaying spreadsheets and bank statements on the courtroom screen. These documents show a pattern of systematic fraud targeting wealthy parents at Westbrook Academy, Barry continued. Mrs. Wilkins didn't just assist Mr. Wiggins with his gambling debts. They worked together to scam other families. Marcy King rose to object, but Rebecca grabbed her arm, shaking her head. Her face had gone pale. Judge Martinez leaned forward. Mrs. Wilkins, do you wish to respond to these allegations? Rebecca's voice trembled. No, Your Honor. Very well. The judge removed her reading glasses. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, including proof of financial fraud, infidelity, and deliberate deception regarding paternity. I am granting Dr. Wilkins's petition for divorce." She paused, scanning the courtroom. "Furthermore, given Mrs. Wilkins's criminal conduct, I am awarding Dr. Wilkins full ownership of all marital assets. The prenuptial agreement is void due to proven criminal activity." Rebecca slumped in her chair as Judge Martinez continued. "Mrs. Wilkins, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution. Mr. Hahn has provided substantial evidence of wire fraud, theft by deception, and conspiracy." In the gallery, Detective Sarah Chan made notes while two uniformed officers moved closer to the courtroom doors. "Your Honor," Marcy began, your client perpetrated a years-long fraud that went far beyond a simple affair." Judge Martinez's voice hardened. "She manipulated not only her husband but an entire school community. The court cannot ignore such calculated deception." As Rebecca was led away in handcuffs, Abraham sat quietly, his expression unreadable. Barry gathered his papers, speaking softly to his client. "Pete Wiggins took a plea deal this morning," Barry said. "He's testifying against Rebecca and the gambling syndicate he was involved with. They're looking at serious time." Abraham nodded. "And Caitlin? She's 18 now. Legally an adult." Barry hesitated. "She's been trying to contact your office." "I know." Abraham stood, straightening his tie. "Some bridges can't be rebuilt." Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered around Jamie Goldstein as she delivered her latest update. The divorce proceedings revealed a complex web of deception involving financial fraud at Westbrook Academy. Multiple families have come forward claiming they were targeted by Mr. Wiggins and Mrs. Wilkins. Sources say criminal indictments are pending. 6 months later, Abraham stood in Metropolitan General's teaching amphitheater, demonstrating a new valve replacement technique to a group of residents. His hands moved with practiced precision over the surgical simulator. "The key is maintaining steady pressure while you secure the sutures," he explained. 1 millimeter's difference can mean the difference between success and failure. In the front row, Dr. Lourdes Mansfield watched with a slight smile. Besides her sat a woman she'd invited to observe, Dr. Teache Roman, the hospital's new head of pediatric surgery. After the demonstration, Lourdes made the introduction. "Abe, meet Dr. Roman. She's revolutionizing our pediatric cardiac program." Letitia's handshake was firm, her dark eyes direct. "That was an impressive demonstration, Dr. Wilkins. Though I prefer working with smaller vessels in my tiny patients. Please call me Abraham." He noticed the plain gold band on her right hand, a widow's ring. "I'd love to hear about your techniques. Maybe over coffee." Later, in the hospital cafeteria, their conversation flowed naturally from surgical procedures to personal histories. "Military service took Jason from me 3 years ago," Letitia said, stirring her coffee. "Left me with 2 boys and a lot of questions about what family really means." Abraham nodded. "I thought I knew what family meant. 18 years of marriage taught me otherwise. I heard about the scandal." Letitia's voice was gentle but direct. "Must have been hard, having your personal life splashed across the headlines. The betrayal was worse than the publicity." Abraham studied his cup. "Finding out my daughter, that Caitlin wasn't mine. That everything I'd built was based on lies. Biology isn't everything." Letitia set down her cup. "My boys are adopted. Jason and I couldn't have children, but they're ours in every way that matters." Their conversation continued through afternoon rounds, where Abraham watched Letitia with her young patients. Her compassion was evident, but so was her strength. She didn't sugarcoat difficult news, but she delivered it with genuine empathy. "You're good with them?" he commented as they left the pediatric ward. "Children deserve honesty," she replied, "even when it's hard. Maybe especially then." Over the following months, their professional collaboration grew into friendship. They consulted on complex cases, combining their expertise to save lives that might have been lost to either of them working alone. Dr. Mansfield watched their growing connection with satisfaction. During a particularly challenging surgery they performed together, she observed their seamless teamwork from the gallery. "They move like they can read each other's minds," a resident whispered. Lourdes smiled. "That's what happens when trust and respect come before everything else." 3 years passed. Abraham stood at the window of his new office at Metropolitan General, now decorated with photos of himself and Teache at medical conferences, their blended family at graduation ceremonies, and most recently, their wedding day. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Troy Calderon entered, holding a letter. Westbrook Academy's new board wants you as a trustee, Troy said. They're implementing ethical oversight guidelines, want your input given. Everything that happened, Abraham took the letter. Interesting timing. Pete Wiggins gets out next month. And Rebecca? 2 more years, with restitution payments. Abraham set the letter down. Caitlin sent another letter last week. Wanting to meet. Troy raised an eyebrow. And some chapters need to stay closed. Abraham's phone buzzed. A text from Teache about their foundation's latest pediatric case. Others are just beginning. Later that evening, Abraham and Teache sat in their home office, reviewing applications for their children's medical foundation. Photos of her sons, now his stepsons, playing baseball decorated the walls alongside their medical degrees. Connor got accepted to medical school. Teache mentioned, sorting through papers. He wants to be a cardiac surgeon, like his stepdad. Abraham smiled. As long as he knows it's his choice. No expectations, unlike some people we know. Her tone was gentle. I got a letter from Westbrook Academy today, he said. They want help preventing future scandals. Are you going to accept? Abraham considered the question. Maybe it's time. Use what happened to protect others. You're not the same man who lost everything 3 years ago, Teache observed. You're stronger. We're stronger, he corrected. This foundation, our family, our work, it's all built on truth this time. The next morning, Abraham sat down to write his response to Westbrook Academy. Through his office window, he could see the hospital chapel where he'd once prayed over a daughter he thought was his. Now he said a different kind of prayer, one of gratitude for second chances and real love. As he finished the letter accepting the trustee position, his office phone rang. Another emergency case, another life to save. He grabbed his coat, heading for where Teache would already be scrubbing in. They worked seamlessly together now, their personal and professional lives intertwined in ways he'd never imagined possible during those dark days 3 years ago. In the surgical lounge after the successful operation, Abraham found a letter in his locker, the latest from Caitlin. Unlike the others, this one would remain unopened. Some betrayals broke you, but others broke you free. He'd finally learned the difference. That evening, at home with Teache and their sons, Abraham watched his new family share stories around the dinner table. Connor talked excitedly about medical school plans while his younger brother debated the merits of different residency programs. You're smiling, Teache observed quietly. Just thinking about how loss can lead to finding something real, he replied. Something true. Later, as they prepared for bed, Teache asked, any regrets? About Caitlin? Abraham considered the question carefully. I regret that she lost her way. That Rebecca's lies cost her a father. But I can't regret moving forward. Sometimes healing means accepting that not every broken thing can be fixed. But some broken things come back stronger, Teache added, squeezing his hand. Abraham nodded, thinking of their foundation's work, their blended family, their shared mission of healing. Everything they'd built together was based on choice, on truth, on mutual respect, not obligation or deception. Some betrayals break you, he said, echoing words he'd repeat many times in the years to come. And others break you free. The key is knowing the difference. Epilogue. 10 years later. The autumn wind scattered leaves across the grounds of Metropolitan General Hospital's new pediatric wing. The brass plaque beside the entrance read, the Wilkins Roman Foundation Center for Children's Cardiac Care. Inside, Dr. Abraham Wilkins, now 58, stood before a gathered crowd at the center's 10th anniversary celebration. A decade ago, he began, his silver hair catching the light. This foundation was born from a belief that every broken heart deserves a chance to heal, whether it's physical or emotional. In the front row, Dr. Teache Roman Wilkins squeezed her husband's hand. Their years together had only deepened the connection that began in those dark days after his divorce. Her sons, now accomplished doctors themselves, sat beside her. Connor, having followed Abraham into cardiothoracic surgery, while Marcus had chosen pediatric oncology. Through this center, Abraham continued, we've treated over 10,000 children who couldn't afford specialized cardiac care. But today, I want to share a different kind of story about healing. The room fell silent as Abraham pulled out a worn envelope. 3 months ago, I received this letter from the Rockland Women's Correctional Facility. It was from my ex-wife, Rebecca. A murmur rippled through the audience. Even after a decade, the scandal remained part of the hospital's lore. The letter had arrived on a Tuesday morning. Dear Abraham, I'm writing this from my prison cell, where I've spent the last 7 years contemplating the magnitude of my betrayal. The doctors say my cancer is terminal, 3 months, maybe 4. Before I go, I need you to know the truth about everything. The money we stole from Westbrook parents didn't just go to Pete's gambling debts. We were running a sophisticated investment scam, targeting wealthy families through their children's education. Pete would identify vulnerable mothers during parent-teacher conferences, and I would befriend them at school functions. We destroyed lives, Abraham, not just yours. Pete committed suicide in his cell last year. He couldn't live with what we'd done, but I need to live long enough to make amends. I've provided the FBI with details about every scam, every victim. Some of the money might be recoverable. Caitlin visits me sometimes. She's a different person now, harder, more cynical. The trust fund you set up for her education remains untouched. She says she doesn't deserve it. Your kindness in providing for her education, despite everything, shames me more than my prison sentence. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know that losing you, losing the life we had, wasn't worth any amount of money or excitement. The woman I was then seems like a stranger now. The nurses here know about your foundation. They say you and Teache are doing amazing work. I'm glad you found happiness. It proves what I learned too late, that love built on truth lasts, while lies poison everything they touch. I'm sorry, Abraham, for everything. Rebecca. Back in the present, Abraham folded the letter carefully. Rebecca passed away last month. In her final act, she helped recover millions in stolen funds, which her victims' families are finally receiving. In the audience, Wendy Bartlett, now Westbrook Academy superintendent, dabbed at her eyes. The scandal had eventually led to her promotion and the school's complete reformation. Under her leadership, Westbrook had become a model of ethical education. But this story isn't about revenge or justice, Abraham continued. It's about the choices we make after betrayal. Do we let it break us, or do we let it break us free? Dr. Lourdes Mansfield, retired but still sharp as ever, smiled knowingly. She had watched Abraham rebuild his life, had introduced him to Teache, had seen their love grow from shared pain into something beautiful. Through this foundation, we've chosen to transform pain into purpose. Every child we save, every family we help, is a testament to the power of starting over. The screen behind him displayed photos of their work. Children before and after surgery, families reunited, lives transformed. Among them was a recent picture that caught everyone's attention. A young woman in a white coat, her features hauntingly familiar. My daughter Caitlin, Abraham's voice softened, graduated from medical school last month. She's beginning her residency in psychiatry, specializing in helping children cope with family trauma. We're rebuilding, slowly. On honest ground this time. The revelation caused another stir. It was the first time he had publicly acknowledged renewed contact with his former daughter. She works at a clinic across town, he continued. Different hospital, different specialty. We see each other at medical conferences sometimes. Small steps, but real ones. Teache stood, joining her husband at the podium. Life isn't about the families we're born into or the lies we're told, she added. It's about the truths we choose to live by. The ceremony continued, but the story wasn't finished. Later that evening, in their home office, Abraham and Teache reviewed files of new cases while their grandchildren played in the next room. Connor's twins and Marcus's daughter filled the house with the kind of honest laughter that only children could provide. Did you tell them about the other letter? Teache asked softly. Abraham nodded, pulling out another envelope. This one was from Pete Wiggins, written days before his death. Dr. Wilkins, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. The guilt finally won. Prison gives you too much time to think about your sins. I want you to know that Caitlin was the only good thing that came from all our deceptions. She may be my biological daughter, but you were her real father in every way that mattered. The way you provided for her education, even after everything we did. It showed me what true fatherhood means. The money is hidden in offshore accounts. Rebecca knows the details. Make sure it gets back to the families we hurt. I'm sorry. Not that it matters now. A knock at the door interrupted them. Caitlin stood in the doorway, still in her hospital scrubs. At 27, she carried herself with a guarded professionalism that spoke of hard lessons learned young. The children's group therapy program you sponsored, she said, it's helping. One of my patients finally opened up today about her parents' divorce. Abraham nodded, careful to maintain the professional distance they'd established. That's good to hear. I have some ideas for expanding the program, she continued. If you and Teache have time to discuss it, maybe over dinner next week? The invitation hung in the air. Another small step toward healing. We'd like that, Teache answered warmly. After Caitlin left, Abraham stood at his office window, watching her walk to her car. The security lights caught the silver threads in his hair, reflecting in the glass. You never told me what was in Rebecca's final letter, Teache said quietly. Abraham touched the pocket where it rested. She wrote it to Caitlin, actually. Asked me to deliver it when I thought the time was right. And is it? He thought about their cautious reconciliation, the careful steps toward rebuilding trust. Soon, maybe, when she's ready to hear that her mother finally understood the difference between love and possession. In the next room, their grandchildren's laughter mixed with the sound of Connor teaching his twins about heart valves using a toy medical kit. The future of their foundation, their family's legacy of healing, played out in miniature. You know what I learned? Abraham said, turning to his wife. Some betrayals do break you. They shatter everything you thought you knew about love and trust and family. But if you're lucky, if you're blessed, they break you free to build something stronger. Something real. Teache took his hand, her wedding ring catching the light. And the key is knowing the difference? No, he smiled, watching their blended, beautiful family through the door. The key is being brave enough to try again. To believe that truth, even painful truth, is better than comfortable lies. In his desk drawer, one last unopened letter waited. Rebecca's final words to the daughter whose life had been built on lies. Someday, when the foundations of their rebuilt relationship were stronger, Abraham would share it with Caitlin. But for now, they would continue their careful dance of reconciliation, building trust one honest moment at a time. After all, they had learned the hardest way possible that real family isn't about biology or obligation. It's about choice, about forgiveness, about the courage to face truth and the wisdom to know that sometimes the deepest wounds can lead to the most profound healing. Outside, the autumn wind continued to scatter leaves across the hospital grounds, nature's reminder that endings are just beginnings in disguise. Inside the Wilkins Roman home, surrounded by the family they had chosen and the love they had built, Abraham and Teache held on to their hard-won truth, that betrayal's greatest gift is the freedom to discover what loyalty really means. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.